All right, guys, we're live. We're talking about investors this morning. What are your expectations for a positive yield and what's realistic these days? Stay tuned. We're going to chat about it.
I'm the ringleader, so listen up.
Thanks for
Morning, mate.
coming on.
Yeah, how are you?
Brought in a finance guru this morning. So you've got the dream team, real estate agent and finance broker. Here to answer any property questions.
This morning about positive gearing expectations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A big topic. I mean, it's actually nice to see from a real estate agent's perspective, investors coming back through open homes. There was probably a 6-month period at the start of this year where, it seemed like it tapered off. And I don't know whether that was just there was no appetite there or, just they felt money could be better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, 100%. I think I'm seeing a lot of investor activity, and that seems to be the consensus as well throughout the mortgage market.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people as well who bought their first property pre-COVID or during COVID have built that equity, and now they've even got, a 5 or 10% deposit. They're wondering what they can do with it.
Yeah. Well, you're probably seeing the wave of investors before, us as at open homes, because you're the one processing the paperwork.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a bunch of seasoned investors, they've got 2, 3, 4, 5, even more properties that, they're structured accordingly so that they can keep going and their income's building, and so is their equity, and they're able to release equity from existing properties and go again when we include more rental income. So,
yeah. And that is the cycle we're now coming into. As rates come down, prices are coming up, equity is being built in, and investors, that have purchased before want to go again. People that were priced out of the market before are seeing this as a good opportunity now to get in.
So I suppose we need to talk about positive gearing. What is positive gearing? What is negative gearing? Because negative gearing is a strategy that a lot of investors use.
Yeah, go far away.
Well, negative gearing is when your rental income is less than your loan expense and your property expenses.
Yeah.
And over the course of the year, you've obviously got the accumulation of those expenses. You've got to cash flow those expenses, loan repayments, strata costs or utilities, land tax, stuff like that. And you're receiving rental income, but it doesn't cover everything. So it's coming out of your pocket.
So it's a net loss.
It's a net loss, but then what that impacts is your taxable income. So you might be on an income of $135,000, for example.
Yep.
Let's say you have a property that's worth $750,000. If you take that and you've borrowed against it on, say, a 90% loan, so a slightly higher interest rate, but albeit less deposit requirement. So you've put in a 10% deposit and the interest rate is 6%, and you've got a rental income of, I think you were saying, let's say DY, $750K apartment, $700 a week.
Yeah, it could be $650, $700 a week.
Yep. So let's say that's around, $80 to $100 out of your pocket a week after, loan repayments and some estimation of expenses. So it's not that much in terms of cash flow, but what it does is it accumulates as a net loss.
Yeah.
And then it changes your taxable income at the end of the year. So you might be taxed on $135,000 in a year. And then that net loss, let's say it's around $5,000. It then brings you down a tax bracket because you apply that loss to your income, including the rental income. And it's reduced it by, say, $5,000, $6,000. And you've paid tax as if you're on that higher bracket.
Yes.
And then it's come through as a lower bracket after the loss. So it's a strategy that a lot of investors I see using, but I'm sure you see a lot of investors and people through opens for investment purposes that want that positively geared property right in the door.
Well, as soon as possible sometimes, because it's cash flow at the end of the day that it's impacting. Sometimes it's not about the profit and loss balance stacking up like on a spreadsheet. It's more about just keeping things sustainable, not being sort of in a mortgage prison where you can't then go again for another property, whether that be investment or personal in future years. So people sometimes, looking at these yields with a lot of detail, but they fail to recognize what's realistic, particularly in a Sydney market. You got to compare apples to apples, and can't look at a Sydney investment in comparison to a Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, and that's where people are taking their money. interstate.
I think each capital city and other regional centres, they've all got different yields purely because of the land prices. The land prices are lower outside of Sydney. The land prices are different in capital cities, so therefore the yields are different. And where the yields are higher, well, you're closing that gap to what the positive gearing scenario is.
Yeah.
But is the asset still quality as it would be in DY or Sydney?
The other thing is the deposit down. So this is going to vary from buyer to buyer, but let's just assume you're a first home buyer and trying to take advantage of a 5% deposit, which a lot of clients are these days. It's going to be a very different set of numbers to an investor putting 10 or 20% down. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning, how those numbers impact the interest payable over the lifetime of the loan.
Yeah, exactly. So for investment purposes, you can gear up as high as 95%.
Yep.
And obviously that gives you a higher interest rate. But again, it's a margin off your taxable income. Yes, it's a higher cash flow component, cash flow requirement on the way through every tax year.
Yep.
But if you're looking at a negative gearing option as a strategy, then it's minimizing your tax potentially over the course of the time, the year.
Yes.
With a higher interest rate. So if it's 95%, you're going to be paying, mid sixes, 6.5%, thereabouts,
Okay.
Maybe even higher for certain structures like trusts and whatnot. 90%, you're hovering around that 6 to 6.2%, therefore a 10% deposit. So you can really make the use of your cash in whatever scenario suits your strategy. And you can choose interest only or principal and interest rate payments. I know a lot of investors that choose interest only. I know a lot of investors that choose principal and interest. The principal and interest investors, they're building equity to then, potentially use an equity release on that same property to then buy again. However, the more common strategy I see is interest only because you're really optimizing that tax benefit and your cash flow because you're only paying the interest component.
Yeah.
What do you reckon, Bill?
Well, I've just had a look at the numbers this morning. The thing that shocked me the most was an extra $20 a week repayment on top of your, minimum repayment will save over a course of a 30-year loan at a 6% interest rate, $80,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and it'll bring down the life of that loan to 2 and a bit years.
That's massive.
You're getting out quicker. So there's small things like that, and the big takeaway for me this morning is in an environment where there's rate cuts being made, you're going to be banking an extra $20 a week if you've got a mortgage of $500,000.
And I suppose bring it back to the positive gearing expectations and the reality of how that goes. It really depends on your strategy and how you're structured. For an example, purchasing a $750K property.
Yeah.
And renting it for $700 a week, assuming there's some rental growth of around 5%, would that be reasonable per year?
Yeah, it's been quite aggressive. It's been more in recent years because on the back of COVID, there was a bit of a rental freeze for a period of time. There wasn't much growth at all, and then all of a sudden it caught up very quickly with landlord costs being 13 interest rate rises. But yeah, that would be say median.
So even factoring in no rental growth, if you're just making interest only repayments and you're waiting for that gearing to sway from negative to positive, your cash flow is already less impacted by paying interest only.
Yep.
And if the rent is consistent and you've got let's say 3 or 4 years in the market for this property, then you're looking at positive gearing, before that 6-year mark side of things.
Yeah.
And even more so when you factor in the growth of rent and the reduction of rates. So it could be a very viable opportunity for people to talk to you about your stock in the mix, mate.
Yeah, that's right. 2 more fun facts here as well. 90% of borrowers maintain their repayments despite falling rate rises. 90%.
That's what all the banks have come out and said this year. Obviously, there's been 2 rate cuts and we're expecting another one today, which should land the cash rate at 3.65. The banks pass those on, within the week. But surprisingly, borrowers have actually kept their repayments the same as if they were still on the higher rates of 50 basis points ago.
Yes.
Which has proved an incredible saving, as you said, over $80,000 on a remaining term.
Yep.
And, anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So really making those extra repayments, if your cash flow can handle it, is where it's at for getting mortgage free sooner.
Short-term pain, long-term gain, sort of, and creating a strategy where if you've got, plans for 5 years ahead, now is the time to put those into action. The other one, the age group of 35 to 44 years old is more likely to reduce repayments.
It's because of their high cost lifestyle, right? Let's say they've got a couple of kids in school.
Childcare, education. Yeah. There you go. That's it.
We'll see what happens today, but I'm sure Billy's got plenty of investment stock, and if anyone needs some advice on their mortgages and structuring it accordingly for their investment strategy, hit me up.
What's the turnaround time on a pre-approval at the moment?
Can be same day.
Can be same day. Well, very quick. And your prediction for today's rate announcement?
I think that'll drop. Everything is where it should be for what the RBA has been targeting for their last little while. So
Giddy up.
Giddy up.
Sounds good, guys. Have a good day. Hope that helps.